Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gen AI Talk in 10, brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. I'm Brad. He's Satish. And let's dive in. We're talking about regulations. What a fun topic. Satish, why don't you tell us how Gen AI so far is being regulated?
Thanks, Brad. Although it's not a very exciting topic, not at least of my favorite, I think it's still a very important topic, especially because the Gen AI landscape has been changing. And I think lawmakers across the world have been, frankly, struggling to keep up, right? They devise these laws from time to time, but Gen AI is a moving target, right? So the regulatory landscape itself continues to evolve as the technology advances and new challenges emerge, right? Because there are bad actors everywhere. And how do you keep these bad actors from doing things that they're not supposed to do? How do you keep the good actors accountable even, right? And how do you reward them for what they're doing in some ways, right? So most of these regulations aim to provide a comprehensive legal framework that covers the entire life cycle of AI systems, because we tend to think this is just about deployment. Not really. It's about design, it's about deployment and development, and then deployment, right? And then it's also about that whole value chain. It's not just about people who are creating these models, the AI models, or people who are creating some things that surround those AI models, but also people who are selling them, who are deploying them, systems integrators and resellers and the like, right? So some of the common themes I've seen, Brad, around these regulations include really 5 things, right? Transparency, that's key, right? And we'll talk about transparency, I know soon. The protection of personal data, so privacy, security, etc. Prevention of harmful impacts, right? Think of it as, there are various risks, levels of risks associated with these AI models. How do you prevent some of those, the harm that can come out of those, not addressing those risks? And then accountability. I mentioned accountability at the start, and then safety and security standards. So those 5 are what we see as the typical framework. Now, it's interesting how people across the world, lawmakers across the world, are approaching regulation differently, right? If you take the European Union, the first one, right, is they introduced the EU AI Act. It's the first comprehensive AI regulation framework. Now, their focus is on risk-based classification of AI systems. And we'll talk about this a little later, but they have taken a horizontal approach, which means I don't care which industry, which vertical, I just want to make sure any AI system across the board is regulated. There are some strict requirements and transparency requirements. We talked about, those 5 things. And then there is heavy fines for non-compliance. Very much like, this reminds me of GDPR, but if you compare GDPR and the AI Act, AI Act has a lot more stricter and more stringent, more heavier fines. So I saw that parallel there, right? And understandably so, because AI is even higher risk.
Maybe you could just pause right here, because the risk-based framework that EMEA is leveraging, that is very unique in the way that they're approaching this topic. So maybe before you move on to the other countries, we can just delve into that a little bit more, and you can explain what that involves.
Yeah. So if you look at the risk-based framework that they've adopted, right, there are 4 levels. The first one is the first level, which you'd expect is minimal risk. Most AI systems have things like, they can be used for spam filters or AI-enabled video games, etc. So they don't really face any obligations per se, even though there is some risks there. So companies in these areas, spam filters, video games, etc., can voluntarily adopt these additional codes of conduct, because Is there a chance that you could use a spam filter in ways that is devious? Maybe, but unlikely because of what it's used for. So the second level is around transparency risk. This is where chatbots, for example, must let users know that they're interfacing with a machine, while certain AI-generated content also must be labeled. If you don't do that, then you're in violation of the EU AI Act, because the real need here is transparency, right? And for people to know I'm interacting with an AI system and not a human, so they might say certain things to an AI system that they might not to a human, and vice versa. So I think that's really what it is. Okay. The other two, right? The last two, high risk and unacceptable risk, I think are most relevant to the kind of work we do at Blue Prism and technology companies in our space. So these are where things like, for example, medical software or systems that are used for recruitment. These will change people's lives, right? There is risk mitigation needed. There's need for quality data. There's need for no bias, or at least mitigate any bias. There's a need for less hallucination. Hallucination you can't avoid completely. Clear user information that's provided, and communicated, and so on. Human oversight. We talk about human in the loop, right? So all of these things are needed to get into this high risk category. And these are the things, that fall into that category. Unacceptable risk. This is the final level, right? And this is where companies might do things like social scoring. Mm-hmm. Now, in some countries, governments and companies have done this to some extent. And that's a clear threat for, rights of people. And that's where it gets, we talk about ethical AI. I think we have, that's where it kind of crosses the line, where I can score you, Brad, and maybe I'll treat you differently based on the score that you have versus somebody else that I might offer services to. And so what the EU AI Act has done is anything that falls into the unacceptable risk category, like social scoring, is banned, right? And if you try to do something, let's just quickly talk about what happens then if you violate any of these conventions that are put in place. There are 3 levels of fines. So tier 1 is the heftiest level. This is where think of these 3 levels as, anybody who goes against prohibitions, obligations, and misleading information, right? So 3 levels. It kind of ties to the 4 risk categories. If you ignore the first one, then 3 risk categories kind of map nicely to the 3 fines, right? 3 tiers of fines. The heftiest fines are for, anybody who is going against something that's banned, right? And because it's the unacceptable level of risk. Now, fines can be anywhere from 35 million pounds up to 35 million pounds for each instance, or 7% of worldwide turnover for that company, whichever is higher, which is interesting, right? And the second level is more around the resellers, the integrators, the distributors, the deployers, all these people. We talked about that second level of risk. And if you violate that, it's about 15 million euros or 3%. And the third and final level is more for the lower level. And that one is where I provided some incorrect information to you. For example, I'm a company that provides chatbots, or I'm using chatbots in customer service, but I never told my customer that they're engaging with the chatbot. Now, that's considered a violation. And so if you violate those kinds of rules, then it's about 7.5 million euros, or about 1% of the turnover. So hopefully this gives people a nice framework to understand what's going on, right, in terms of regulations with the leading AI Act out there, which is the EU AI Act.
Absolutely. And we'll continue this on the next Gen AI Talk in 10.